is Michelle Andrews, and I'm a member of the Vic TESOL committee and part of the professional learning team. And it's my pleasure today to be welcoming you and introducing our presenter. So welcome to this webinar, using the Foundation to Level 6 Literacy Teaching Toolkit to support EAL learners with Yao Choong. I'd like to start with an acknowledgement of country. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which I'm joining you from today. And I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and extend this acknowledgement to traditional owners and the elders of the country on which you're joining this webinar today. A couple of technical notes. If during the session you have technical issues, you can either use the chat function to ask for some help or use the email address that you can see on your screen, victesol@victesol, for assistance. If you would like to ask questions of Yao and the other panelists, please use the question and answer, the Q&A function. You can ask questions throughout the session and they'll be responded to at the end of the presentation. If you can see a question that you would like to upvote with the thumbs up icon, that will give us an indication of which questions are of interest to most people. So you can do that if you're interested in somebody else's question. The links, resources, PowerPoint, and the recording will all be made available through the chat function during the session. And then you'll also get those via email after the event. Now, Annalise Wallace is also a panelist today, and she'll be able to answer some questions at the end of the session if necessary. So if you have questions for her, you can also put those in the Q&A. But now it's my pleasure to introduce Yao Choong. Yao's a Senior Project Officer at the Department of Education and Training with 10 years of TESOL teaching experience. She's taught English in Korea and tutored EAL students at VCE level. She's worked at Western English Language School and Blackburn English Language School, teaching primary-aged migrant and refugee students. Yao was primary curriculum coordinator at Blackburn English Language School before joining the department in 2018. And having taught with her for a number of years at Blackburn, I can attest to both her knowledge and her teaching skills. So you're in good hands. She now works to support teachers of EAL learners in conjunction with other areas in the department. So thank you, Yao. I'll hand over to you now.
Thank you, Michelle. I would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of all the lands from where we are gathered here today and pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. Thank you all for taking the time to attend this webinar today, especially in this challenging time of remote and flexible learning. Thank you for doing all your best for the students. So in today's webinar, we will be looking at how we can use the Foundation to Level 6 Literacy Teaching Toolkit to support primary EAL learners. So the Foundation to Level 6 Toolkit is part of a set of resources that the Department of Education has created. Now, I know that some of the participants in today's webinar are not from Victoria, so I just want to explain that the Foundation to Level 6 refers to the primary years of schooling. And throughout this webinar, you might hear me talk about Foundation to Level 6 or F-6 or primary, but they all refer to the same thing. So what I'll do today is I'll give you a brief overview of the structure of the primary toolkit and show you how to find the specific EAL content that is embedded in the toolkit. I will also talk a little bit about the learning needs of EAL students because this has implications on how we use the ideas in the toolkit to support them. Then I will explain how you could use the ideas and strategies in the toolkit and tailor them to support the EAL learners in your class. So in this presentation, what will happen is I will go between my PowerPoint presentation and the toolkit website. So please bear with me. So the toolkit provides practical advice and high impact teaching strategies that improve outcomes in speaking and listening, reading, viewing, and writing. The content for the toolkit is structured around each of the 3 modes for English, and there is also a section on multimodal literacy. It includes sections on effective instruction and the literacy focus for each of the 3 language modes. There are teaching practices, approaches to teaching, and in-practice examples, which include lesson plans for a range of teaching practices. So the lesson plans that you will see in the toolkit, they include links to the English curriculum. And since 2019, the primary toolkit also contains advice and strategies that support teachers to differentiate for EAL learners. It includes advice for teachers of EAL and English first language students learning together. So here is the page, landing page, the Literacy Teaching Toolkit. You will have been sent a link yesterday in an email by TESOL. And if you scroll down, there is a map of the Literacy Teaching Toolkit with links to the pages of the toolkit that you can click on. So you can scroll down and have a look at the key to the map. So the EAL specific content that has been integrated into the toolkit are marked on the pages with an EAL icon that you can see down here in the key. It's a speech bubble with the words EAL written in them. And as you can see, not all pages have been annotated with EAL specific advice, but that is not to say that you cannot use the other EAL content for your EAL learners. You just need to consider how you might differentiate that for your EAL learners. So you'll be able to click on this map and it will take you directly to the page that you want to go to. So the EAL content is organized in a few different ways on the toolkit, and I'll take you through that and talk about them as well. So first of all, the EAL advice may be a single link to an entire new page. So for example, there is an EAL icon here on the effective writing instruction page. And if I click on it, it will take me to this page where there's a lot of existing content. And down here at the bottom, there is a link to a page called Writing and EAL Students, and you can click on that and that will take you to an entirely new page. The EAL content may also be embedded within the original literacy content in accordions that will expand when you click on them. So for example, if I go into accountable talk, and I click on that. So here's the existing content. Here are some accordions that you can click on, and it will show you some ideas about how you can differentiate the strategies for your EAL students. Now on this particular page, there are also links to the English curriculum, and you will find that as you look through the toolkit, where there are links to the English curriculum, we will also include links to the EAL curriculum as well. So if I go back to the map. So there are also examples of lesson plans in the toolkit under in-practice examples, and you'll find them in reading and viewing, speaking and listening, and also writing. And most of them will include links to the English curriculum. And where there are links to the English curriculum, we are also including links to the EAL curriculum. So if I have a look at, I think it was shared writing. If we have a look at shared writing down here, I think it is this one. There are 3 sample lessons with links to the English curriculum, and the EAL curriculum links are added beneath them, below them. What you are going to notice as you are looking through the toolkit, and especially if you're looking for the EAL curriculum links, they have not all been uploaded because there has been a delay in the process due to the impact of COVID-19, but you should expect to see them, all the EAL curriculum links, on the website eventually. Unfortunately, I can't give you a timeline of when that could be. That is actually outside my control at the moment. Okay, so I'm going to talk now about the EAL curriculum, because this will set us up for understanding how the EAL content is organized on the toolkit. So the EAL curriculum aims to ensure that EAL students learn English, learn about English, and learn through English. In the new EAL curriculum, it includes strands such as communication and linguistic structures and features, and also includes a new strand called the plurilingual and cultural awareness strand. And this is based on latest research in second language learning, and it acknowledges that all EAL learners, even those entering formal education at a very young age, actually come to school with knowledge of at least one other language. And these learners may be able to read or view and understand texts in their home language or other languages to different degrees. So this means that these learners are plurilingual and they have an understanding of another language, and they can use this knowledge to help them learn a new language like English. So the EAL curriculum provides opportunities for students to draw on their knowledge of their own languages as a way to enhance their developing understanding of the English language. It allows them to value the students' competence in different languages. And the curriculum also acknowledges the importance of languages and the role they play in an individual's sense of identity, of self and identity. And the curriculum also provides opportunities for students to develop their communication skills, their linguistic knowledge, cultural understandings of in English and in other languages, so that they can fully participate in Australian society. There is a link here to a page on the toolkit where it explains about plurilingualism. So if you're interested, you can access that from this slide. The EAL curriculum is based on pathways and are based on immersion points. So in primary, there are pathways A and B. The immersion point relates to the time in a student's school life that they become immersed in an English-speaking environment. So students at pathway A are at the beginning stages of their school lives, and students at pathway B are at the mid stages in their school lives when they first come into Australia and start learning in an English immersed environment. So in pathway B, there are 4 levels. BL, B1, B2, and B3. EAL learners without prior formal schooling and with minimal home language experience will begin their pathways at level B, and all the other students will begin their pathway on one of these 3 levels, depending on their levels of English. Students who enter foundation, grade 1 and grade 2, go on to pathway A. Now, students who are in foundation are generally considered pre-literate, whether they are of another language background or whether they are native speakers of English. And so we don't make the differentiation between them for the EAL students and the mainstream students with an AL level. And EAL students who enter foundation with minimal literacy will, in their own languages, will begin their early immersion in English at level A1. So this chart down here shows that you may have EAL learners in your class with different levels of experience of English, and depending on the learning intention of each lesson in your class, you might differentiate for the EAL students in different ways so that they can maximize their learning experience. So an EAL student at level 3 might have a language level of BL, B1, B2, or B3. We often differentiate for all the students in a class to provide them with appropriate challenges for learning, and this includes for the EAL students. We make adjustments for content, for the learning process, and how the students make sense of the content and the product, which is how they demonstrate what they know and understand. There are a few different ways that you could think about to differentiate the ideas and strategies in the Literacy Teaching Toolkit to support these learners. And how you differentiate will actually depend on the student's ability and the expected learning of the activity. You could differentiate by activity where students will, where EAL students who need more support might engage in concrete familiar experiences, or you might reduce the number of steps required in an activity for them. So for example, in order for EAL students to focus on using the correct linguistic structures and features when they're writing an when they're writing an information report, rather than ask them to research the information for the task, you might want to provide them with the information which then they use to focus on using in their writing. And then in that way, they only focus on considering how the language they use for the writing. And for some students, this may also mean writing a text using sentence starters. And so they're using simple, highly controlled linguistic features. And it's also a way for the teacher to model the correct sentence structures for the EAL students. Sometimes you might decide that it is best for the EAL students learning at that point to engage in a different text than other students in class. It may be an abridged text if the EAL student is engaging in independent learning. It may be an information report on a familiar topic with additional subheadings. For support, if your EAL students are learning to skim a text along with the other students in your class. It may also be a different text with a similar theme to what the other students are reading. And if it's an audio recording, you might slow it down for the students so that they can understand. Other times you might consider differentiating for them by changing the conditions in which they work, but still expect them to engage in the same text as other students. And this could involve providing extensive support to these students, giving them a lot of pre-teaching to help them access the text. And it can also include extensive opportunities for reworking the materials that they produce in their writing. Part of the differentiation for EAL students now can include using plurilingual strategies. So for example, the EAL students might be reading a section of the same text as their mainstream peers and discuss it using their first language to clarify their understanding. And by allowing EAL students to use their stronger language in this instance, you're providing them with an opportunity for richer discussions. You can also support your EAL learners by differentiating your expectations of them. So you might ask for shorter and more simple responses for them. You might be less concerned with accuracy and fluency when they're talking. You might be more tolerant of any mistakes that they make as they are attempting to communicate in English. These examples of differentiation for when you really want the EAL learners to take risks with their learning. You would obviously adjust and think about other types of expectations that you have for your students, depending on what learning outcome you want from them. In terms of expectations, you might actually be placing additional expectations on your EAL students that you don't expect from your mainstream students. So for example, part of the classroom culture that you create for your students might include when and how the EAL students would use their home language to help them with their learning. You might also expect them to report back on the discussions using English so that everyone can understand. This will then mean that your EAL students will have the additional task of working out what they're reporting back and how they're reporting back and how they're going to phrase their ideas in English to communicate back with the rest of the class. Let's have a look at a writing sample lesson on the toolkit to see what differentiation might look like for the EAL learners. So if I go here, teaching grammar in context. So the EAL curriculum content descriptions for this particular lesson sequence have been uploaded onto the page here beneath the English curriculum links. I'll talk about them later using my PowerPoint slide, just because it's organized in a way that actually contributes to the discussion better. So this lesson focuses on how circumstantial details about an activity in a prepositional phrase can enrich the meanings of sentences. And if you have a look at the learning intention and the success criteria, you'll notice that students are meant to find examples of prepositional phrases and explain also how the phrases tell the reader where a certain activity takes place. Here is an example of differentiating the text and the conditions for the EAL students so that they can participate in the learning activity here. So these suggestions are mainly about using concrete materials, using bilingual texts, and using visuals to support your students to access the text. If you keep scrolling down, I'm not going to go through every single lesson plan in detail because it's something that we can look at in our own time. There's also an accordion here about supporting EAL students. This particular one's about using bilingual texts. And at the end, when it comes to the students writing their own text, you might want to consider asking EAL students whether they could produce a similar text that is set in a context that they're familiar with. For example, it could be their home language. Now, as you read through this particular lesson sequence in your own time, you'll notice that although the aim is for students to use prepositional phrases in their own writing, so a writing task, there are many occasions where students actually need to be reading an English text and speaking and listening in English as well as part of the lesson. And so for EAL students, this could be an additional learning or cognitive demand during the lesson. And so I'm going to talk about that a little bit more now and how that affects how we work with our students. So as you can see here, again, the English content description is about writing, and it's about understanding that meaning of sentences can be enriched through the use of noun groups or phrases and verb groups. One of the activities in this lesson sequence is looking at sentences from the text and identifying which parts of the sentences talk about where is it happening. So for EAL students to be able to participate in this activity, they'll need to be able to read and understand the sentences, either with support or independently, to identify the prepositions. So some of these students, EAL students, if they're working at a B2 or a B3 level, you can expect that they can read texts that contain compound and complex sentences, which is something that you will find in this particular text for this lesson plan. But for students working at the BL and B1 level, the EAL content description provides you with an indication of what they might be able to do with support, and it provides you with some ideas about how to support these students at BL and B1 to participate in the same activity as the other students. And so because they're working at a much lower level in terms of language, you might, for example, select a few sentences from the text and rewrite them so to make them simpler and onto a piece of paper where the students can read and cut out the prepositional phrases themselves. So then after that, using that in the writing task, this cut up text may be used to scaffold the students into writing their own sentences. So when you think about how to scaffold your EAL students in a particular task, you might want to consider how all three language modes can be used together to support their learning. I'm going to talk about another lesson from the toolkit. I'm not going to go to the website, but this link on this slide will actually take you straight to the page that I'm talking about. This one here is a series of 3 guided reading lessons, lesson plans based on the text Tadpoles. This particular lesson plan doesn't actually have any specific EAL differentiation or strategies embedded within them, but that's not to say that this is not a good lesson that you can use with your EAL students. You would just have to look at that and consider how you might tailor that to your students' learning needs. What I'm going to talk about today is the first lesson in the series, which is about using images in a factual text to support meaning. So these lessons are actually pitched at a foundation and a level 1 students, because for mainstream students, this is where they begin to develop an understanding about the concepts of print. And you'll see that reflected in the English curriculum content descriptions. They're all for foundation and level 1. And it's all about how words and images work together to contribute to meaning. In terms of the EAL curriculum, the content descriptions from level A1 and A2 are included because EAL students working at A1 and A2 are usually in foundation, grade 1 or grade 2. And you can easily use this lesson with these students with some differentiation for the EAL learning needs. However, the content descriptions for level BL and B1 are also included, even though the students working in these levels are in grade 3 to grade 6. And the reason for this is because BL and B1 students are also at the beginning stages of learning English, and therefore they may also need to learn some basic concepts about print in English. The ideas in this lesson plan may be just as appropriate for an older EAL student who is just beginning to learn English. But that is not to say that teachers will take this lesson plan aimed at younger students and just use it with the older students. As with all sample lessons, you will consider how it can work with your students and you make changes as necessary. So you might want to use a different text with content that is more age appropriate, but use some of the teaching strategies and ideas described in this lesson plan. And this is something that you will notice with the EAL content descriptions that are being added to the toolkit. And this is an acknowledgement that some of the lesson plans aimed at developing basic language and literacy skills in younger children may also be appropriate to use with older students with some differentiation. So let's have a look at how you might want to differentiate to support your EAL learners. So using the same lesson about tadpoles, these are some steps in the lesson sequence for the first lesson using the book. For the purpose of this presentation, I've not included all the steps in the lesson sequence on this slide. I just wanted to fit them all onto the same slide. I've only included steps 2, 4, and 5. But if you go to the toolkit, you'll be able to access the entire lesson sequence, and you can also do that through the links here. So at step 2 of the lesson, the teacher asks an open-ended question to the class to activate their prior knowledge. And with your EAL students, even if they're familiar with the topic, the question, what do you know about frogs, may be too open-ended. And you might want to ask specific close-ended questions that will elicit the type of words that you want the EAL students to be aware of. For example, if you say, what is this? You will get answers such as legs or eyes. And these are the nouns that the students will come across in the text. So doing this prepares them for the words that might come across in the text later. Then at step 4, the students read the text twice to themselves, while the teacher listens to each child read in the group individually. So for the EAL students, you might want to read with them first so that you can model the reading strategies as you read together. And after that, they could read to a friend, and at this stage, you could place the expectation that both students work together either using English or their home language to discuss the text. And this helps them clarify any conceptual misunderstandings they might have. And finally, you might expect that the EAL students then read by themselves now that they are more familiar with the text. At step 5, the teacher checks for understanding with the students by asking them to verbally recall the life stages of a frog. So with the EAL students, you might want to provide them with pictures so that they can reorder by themselves to demonstrate that they actually understood the concept of the life cycle of the frog. Then they can talk about the pictures. So by breaking this down into a 2-step process, you're actually helping to ease the cognitive load on the EAL students. So first they focus on working out the stages of in a frog's life cycle. Then they focus on using language on how to talk about the life cycle in English. And alternatively, if your EAL students are more confident with their English, they may be able to just use the key vocabulary on the flashcards to help them recall the life cycle. I'm actually ahead of time. I've come to the end of my presentation. But we can spend a bit more time on question and answers. So here I've included a link to the Literacy Teaching Toolkit and also to the map of the toolkit. That will make it easier for you to find where the specific EAL content is. And because I've also talked a lot about the EAL curriculum, I've included a link there as well. I've also included this link to a webinar that the VCAA is hosting. I think it's on Tuesday, the 13th of October, and it's about plurilingualism. So if you're interested to hear more about this strategy, you can attend this webinar. So that's the end of my presentation. I think we can move to questions and answers.
Yeah, look, Yanya, thank you. It's a really exciting time to see these resources and links embedded, especially in an existing mainstream resource, because teachers are time poor and they don't always have time to go to lots of different places. So it's fantastic to have those links and resources added into the toolkit, and to have that map which makes it so easy to find them. And it's been great to have the overview so that we can now go and do some exploring on our own. So thank you very, very much, Yanya, for your presentation. It's time now, if you want to add something into the Q&A function and you haven't already done it, now would be a good time to put your question in, and then shortly the panelists will be able to start answering some of those questions. And then I'll come back at the end and give you a little bit more information. So, Yanya, do you want to have a look at some of those questions?
Yeah, okay, I'll go
Looks
through
like
the
we've got a few.
lessons. So, Zabina is asking, saying that I know that this literacy toolkit is for primary level. Is there something similar for secondary EAL students? There is a secondary literacy teaching toolkit. And what's really exciting about that particular toolkit is that the feedback from the secondary teachers is that they wanted something that is very specific to each learning area. But within each learning area, they will actually tell you how you can integrate the language and literacy learning. So I think at the moment they've got English up and also science. So if you have a look at that, there will be pages about integrating language and literacy into science, and also maths might be up. I'm not too sure, but there's definitely a secondary toolkit for all the subject area teachers with a strong emphasis on learning the English language as well. If you go to the toolkit site, the one that I showed you and that David O'Carley has sent to you in an email yesterday, you will be able to access the secondary teaching toolkit that way. Keep looking at that because the other learning areas will be uploaded there progressively throughout the year as well. Annika is asking, is there a site with bilingual text online? Yes, there are some. Off the top of my head, I think Melbourne Uni has a site where they have created bilingual texts for students. I don't know if all the languages are there, but certainly some of the more popular languages are there as well. And if you are looking for bilingual text, you can also get in contact with LMERC, which is our Language and Multicultural Education Resource Center. And they will be able to help you with sourcing bilingual texts.
Yanya, I also noticed that Ian has put in the chat another site to find bilingual books online for free, so you might want to have a look in there.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle, and thank you, Ian. Punita, how readily available is English literature for kids in Dari? I'm not entirely sure what you're asking, Punita. Are you saying whether they are English literature translated into Dari for students? Or whether if you can't find any English stories translated into Dari for your students, you might want to look at what they actually any traditional stories that they already have and use that as a start for your students. Lauren is saying that some great examples of how to use the toolkit with EAL students. Thank you. Will I be able to do more presentations on practical examples for teachers to use in the classroom? I will have to get back to you on that, Lauren. I'll have to go back to my office and speak with my manager and see whether this is possible. But we are actually working on a resource at the moment. We are looking for a resource, working on a resource at the moment where we're creating looking at plurilingualism and working on bilingual texts with schools and teachers, and we're looking for teachers in schools to participate in that. And if you're interested, if you could drop us an email to participate in this project, then we could be more involved in that. I've also, Lauren, just gotten a message from my manager, and I think if you would like more presentation on practical examples, yes, I can do that. Ian, thank you, Ian, for posting the link for the bilingual books. Magda, oh, it's popping around, sorry. The messages are popping around, so I'm trying to make sure I get them all. I would like there to be a PD for the secondary toolkit. Danielle, so Danielle is asking whether they are professional learning for the secondary literacy teaching toolkits. So the BASTO is actually running webinars on the secondary literacy teaching toolkit. So if you have a look at their website, you might be able to find information on that. And I believe that they've actually recorded past webinars on the secondary toolkit as well. So if you have a look there, you should be able to find something. And maybe Annalise may be able to post a link into the chat as well. Kim is asking if there is an assessment tool with which teachers can use, sorry, it's jumping around. Where's it? Is there an assessment tool which teachers can use which reflects the EAL curriculum? So in 2020, we have an interim assessment tool that you can use, but we are to report on your EAL students' achievement. We're coming up with a tool that is aligned to the EAL curriculum for 2021. So that's coming. We also have the TEAL assessment resources, and they're all aligned to the current, to the old curriculum, but they are also in the process of being updated and being realigned to the EAL curriculum. So you can have a look at that if you're looking for assessment resources. Where is, okay. Magda is asking, is the order of modes, speaking and listening, reading and viewing and writing, seems to be presented in many places in a different order? Magda, I realize that I have ordered them differently in my presentation, and that's actually my mistake. I should have checked that more carefully. In EAL, we tend to order them speaking and listening, reading and viewing, and then writing. And that is because with as you are learning a language, as you will be aware, if you are learning a new language, the first thing that you would do is to actually learn to speak and listen before you read and view. And I know that in the English curriculum is different. They put reading and viewing, writing, and speaking and listening last. But in the EAL curriculum, it's speaking and listening first. Do you think it's better to use realistic photos rather than clip art pictures for the EAL learners? I like to use realistic photos because it's more realistic and because it's more realistic. But I do think there's also a place for clip art pictures, especially if you're doing a worksheet for the students and you don't actually want too much going on in on the worksheet that distracts the students. So it really depends on what your intention with the pictures are. Done. This is done. Bilingual word lists. Kim, I'm not sure what your question is about regarding the bilingual word list. If you put your question in again, I can get to that. Thank you, Punita. Helen is saying, although the process is speaking and listening, reading and viewing, writing, I notice some of my EAL students do not necessarily progress in this order. Some of my students are competent at reading, however, their speaking and listening needs to be refined. Helen, you've just described my own situation when I was growing up. So for some students, they, especially if they come from a country where they are exposed to English, they might be learning English in school. However, the way they learn is by rote, probably, and they do engage in a lot more reading and viewing, and also writing, but not necessarily speak. So they don't actually have the experience of speaking and listening. And I think the way it's presented in the EAL curriculum with speaking and listening first, that's actually the natural development of language if you are learning the language as I guess a native speaker. Kathy's posted a website to Basto for the webinars on the toolkit. Thank you, Kathy. Punita relates that kids from largely Asian countries can read and write, but needs refining in speaking and listening. Thank you. Angelina, how will we find out about the extra session? Today has been great. Thank you. When we hold extra sessions, Vic TESOL will send the information out in their bulletin, I'm assuming. Dave or Carly, can you confirm that?
Sorry, what was the question again, Yao?
So the question was, how do we find out if we are running extra sessions?
Extra sessions on the toolkit?
On like teaching strategies or toolkit, on the toolkit or?
Yeah. So all of our upcoming professional learning is on our website. I've posted some links in the chat function. One thing that people are asking about quite a bit is bilingual texts and culturally diverse literature. We are actually running a series of events on culturally diverse literature. The links are in the chat function, or you can just go directly to Vic TESOL website. But yeah, all of our upcoming events are on our website. If you have any suggestions for professional learning, we would love to hear from you. You can just, I'll put my email in the chat function and you can email through your request.
Okay. I'm still going through some of the other questions, going back to see which ones I've missed. Here's a question about how can I practically help students who are struggling with understanding concepts rather than the language. So with EAL students, they I find that hands-on activities work really well for them. With some of the older students, sometimes, especially in things such as, science or maths, I find that it could help if I set them some homework about looking up concepts in their first language. And at least if they get an understanding of the concept in their first language first, then when they come back to school, they can then, it scaffolds them into, working through the concepts with you in English at school. So hopefully I've answered that. Is there a good reference source to learn about the social cultural differences of students from different countries so as to avoid making anyone uncomfortable? I'm not sure about that, but if you contact LeMerc, the library, they're usually very knowledgeable about cross-cultural references and resources. Okay. So, bilingual text. Okay. Is there a resource which has translated word list, for example, in the D? Kim, so I don't think there is a resource which has translated word lists available. It is quite a huge to have translated word lists in different topics for different languages. If you have multicultural education aides in your school, they might be able to help with translating some of the word lists that you have. The other thing you could do is it could be a home learning activity that your student does with their parents. If their parents have literacy as well, you could use your school community to build word lists that way. That's tailored to your school. Or if you have older EAL students who are bilingual, they can come up with the word lists themselves, and that's all part of using the plurilingual strategy that is described in the EAL curriculum. So Caitlin has put it in the Q&A. World Stories and Story Weaver have access to bilingual texts. Thank you. Not all EAL students are at the same stage in a mainstream classroom. How would this look like in a literacy planning document? Do you have any you can recommend or share? On the Department Fuse website, we have a package called Introduction to the EAL curriculum. And within that, there is a PowerPoint that talks about how you can plan for your EAL students alongside with your mainstream students. So it's a little bit, I think I touched on that a little bit today, but maybe not in great depth. But one of my slides in today's presentation had the English content descriptions on the one side and the different levels of the EAL curriculum along on the other side. So it's a matter of looking at your activities, your planner, and then matching, and then looking at what the literacy content descriptions are and working out which ones the EAL ones are for that particular lesson or term planner. Should we stop using the old EAL resources we downloaded a while back? Which ones are you talking about, Annika? If you could clarify, then I'm better placed to respond to that. They are bilingual picture visual dictionaries, which may help. Thank you, Angela. Punita, thank you. Older students, make the older students do the work, not always the teachers. Is that linked to the toolkit? Bernadette, I'm not sure what you're referring to. That is linked to the toolkit. It was for new arrivals. So we are currently updating some resources for the new arrivals. The content is pretty much the same, but it is updated with some new ideas and concepts that teachers can use in the classroom. So we don't have a firm deadline from timeline from when that's going to be completed, but when it is, we'll definitely promote that and you will know about it. Ian's asking if there is a good primary maths diagnostic assessment for EAL students. Maths online interview is comprehensive, but takes a long time to get through the whole class. Ian, we don't have a separate maths diagnostic assessment for EAL students. In terms of assessment for EAL students in maths, the question is, are you assessing them for their maths knowledge, or are you assessing their ability to read the maths questions? And I think having that distinction might help you think about what other assessment tools you might need for your students in assessing their maths ability. My school uses the Australian curriculum. I've been using the EALD progressions in ACARA. Are you familiar with that? Do you think the EAL curriculum is more comprehensive? Helen, I'm not very familiar with ACARA, but hang on a sec. Sorry, I'm not very familiar with ACARA, but I do know that they talk about using the student's first language. But ACARA's learning progressions are actually aimed at non-specialist teachers only, and they are more general. Hope that answers your question. Hang on. I've lost my question and answer window here. Kim is saying that she's completed the early years numeracy with a translator in the past. And that is, thank you, Kim. And that's one way that you can assess whether your students learn, learning is maths concepts related or language development related as well. I think I've come to the end of the questions, and I hope I haven't missed anyone. Can I hand it back to you, Michelle? And if there are any questions, I'm happy to take them as well if they get emailed to us.
Yeah, well, we're getting close to time now anyway. So just a couple of things. Thank you again, Yao. It's been great to be able to draw on your expertise, and I've appreciated the way that you've been able to answer all those questions. And, you know, we thank you for the offer to put in extra questions. You never know, we always think of things after we finish, don't we? 5 minutes after you finish, you think of something. So before we finish, I'll just run through a couple of things. The PowerPoint is available now for download, and a recording of the event will be available shortly. So that information will all be in an email tomorrow, and the resources will be open access for everyone, not just members only. When you leave this meeting, the evaluation survey will open automatically, and it'll all be sent to you tomorrow in an email as well. So if you don't have time to complete it now, you will get it again in an email. We've got a few upcoming PL events that I just want to mention, but the information is all on the Vic TESOL website, and also Dave's putting it in the chat, the links. So there's meeting the graduate standards for working with EALD learners with Dr. Jenny Barnett. That's on Tuesday, the 8th of September, and it's free. There's a series on culturally diverse literature professional learning. That's the September the 9th, September the 15th, and October the 7th. Resourcing and networking session at Lemerck, Thursday the 15th of October. It's free and it's face-to-face, all being well. The ACTA International Conference entitled Pushing the Boundaries will be in Brisbane the 28th to the 30th of September next year, 2021. If you would like to be a Vic TESOL member and get the benefits of the members only resources, and there's also some events that are discounted for Vic TESOL members, as well as a few other things, go to the website to sign up. There is a remote learning tab on the website. If you need support with remote learning, you can look at the resources that have been collecting there. If you would like to say your thanks to Yao, you can do so now in the chat function. So I'll give you a minute to do that, and then we'll say goodbye, unless there's anything that anybody, David or Carly or anybody else would like to say. And we will hope to see you at another Vic TESOL event very soon.
Thank you,
very
everyone.
much, everyone. Thank you, Yan Yao.
And I want to say thank you to other people for sharing the resources to multilingual links to multilingual resources in the chat as well. Okay.